order tonight's meeting of the ISD 191 Burnsville Egan Savage School Board. The date is June 18th. I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting of the 6:30 p.m. I wanted to start by making a procedural note. Folks that are right here in Burnsville probably are noticing we have quite a storm coming through. We will do our best to get through the whole meeting as much as planned. If connectivity issues really become an issue, then we will reconvene Monday at 6:30 p.m. So we'll hopefully get through all of this. Welcome everyone who is here. Thank you for joining us. With that, Director Hume, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll start by approving the agenda tonight. I will take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schott. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Hume. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please do the roll call?
Katie Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller, Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Hallwigger,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz.
Aye.
And the motion carries. I will note that we are aware that Director Miller is having connectivity issues, and he will be doing his best to stay joined as best he can. We'll start with the information portion of our meeting, starting with a report about FY21 Board Goals. Essentially, we have been working on this since February. The board decided that we wanted to establish goals for ourselves each year. And we first met on February 27th with MSBA and in a retreat. And the MSBA guided a self-evaluation of the board, and then stemming from those conversations came the development of SMART goals. April 23rd, we adjourned to a retreat again to discuss and develop the board goals. June 11th, we had a workshop to review our work, and then tonight is the final report. Essentially, the goals, there are 3 goals. One relates to onboarding of board members through candidacy, and then finally through to new board members being elected and welcomed aboard. Second, the second goal relates to board members as ambassadors, and really making sure that we are helping in our roles to grow enrollment. And number 3, to connect all board work to the 191 strategic plan. And anyone who's looking at an agenda for this evening will note that we now have the strategic directions noted next to a specific strategic direction noted next to each agenda item, and to designate which strategic direction we're working on. So I wanted to thank everyone for all of your input and time. And I'm really excited that we do have goals, and not simply goals, but SMART goals that for us to work on this year. So, are there any comments that board members would like to make? Seeing none, okay. We will move to committee reports, and we'll start with the Policy Review Committee with Director Chester.
Hi, thank you, Chair Alt. The Policy Review Committee met last week and reviewed a couple of 3 policies, and 2 are on the agenda represented tonight. The first on the consent agenda with minimal or non-substantive changes is policy 615, which is testing accommodations, modifications, and exemptions for students with IEPs, section 504 plans, or LEPs. And so that's on the consent agenda going forward to this evening. And then under new business will be presented for approval on first reading a new policy 599 regarding memorials for deceased students and staff.
Thank you. Negotiations Committee with Director Schatz.
Negotiation Committee has no reports.
Thank you. Legislative Committee with Director Hallwigger.
No report from the Legislative Committee tonight.
Great, thank you. And Student Performance and Achievement Committee, there is no report. We will expect not to have meetings in July, and we'll be back planning these reports starting in August. Are there any reports relating to board assignments, any other board assignments?
Yes, I have two reports, Gerald. The Association of Metropolitan School Districts. There were two meetings in May for AMSD on May 1st and May 22nd. This is the usual pattern for AMSD. There had been no April meeting due to the coronavirus. Both of the May meetings were Zoom meetings. The guest speaker for May 1st was the Minnesota Department of Education Deputy Commissioner, Dr. Heather Mueller. From the AMSD minutes, she talked, in quotes, about the current focus areas for MDE, including technology and internet access, school-age care, graduation and summer programming, and noted that while many aspects of distance learning have gone well, there are many inequities and disparities that must be addressed, especially related to access to the technology necessary to engage in distant learning, end of quote. She also held a Q&A following her remarks. Later, Paula Forbes from Reimagine Minnesota organized the participants into Zoom breakout rooms to have the opportunity to share their experiences with distance learning following a Google Doc of discussion questions. Each group recorded notes, which were briefly shared in a large group. As noted in the minutes, the conversations were rich and thought-provoking. There were two major presentations at the May 22nd meeting. The first presented by Adash Uni from the Government Relations Department and Tom Melcher from the School Finance Department on the 2020 legislative session. The second was by Andre Prahl, Agency Finance Director on the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, also known as the CARES Act. Both were very informative and detailed and can be found on the AMSD.org website. I encourage you to look them up. All three presenters came from the Minnesota Department of Education. AMSD is recessed until fall, and that concludes my report on AMSD. ISD 917. The June meeting of 917 was held on June 9th. It was somewhat introspective and solemn, as it was the first one in many years without Jill Lewis as chair. She passed away on June 7th after battling cancer for 2 years. Admired in her community of Inver Grove Heights as well as 917, she will be greatly missed. Following an official statement of teleconferencing board meetings and the good news reports by administrators, the board launched into its agenda, which included review of annual wellness goals, approval of the 2021 lunch contracts with our district 191 and Lancer Food Service, a review and approval of the 2021 school lunch prices, resolution terminating support employees, review of variances for 2021, resolution to approve the superintendent and one designee as the identified officials with authority to approve access to the External User Access Recertification System for MDE, review and approve contracts for lead teachers for special education, buyer, payroll specialist, and executive assistant. We set the July meeting date, and we did the annual performance review of the superintendent. 9/17 is on a fiscal year calendar, unlike our district, which is on a calendar year. So its organizational meeting will be this July on the 7th. This concludes my report on 9/17.
Thank you, Director Courier. Are there any other reports? Seeing none, we'll turn to the consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for separation for separate consideration. Are there any items board members would like to separate for discussion? Hearing none, I will take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Chester, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Courier. Ms. Kenny, will you please do the roll call?
Yes. Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Holwiger, Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. New business. We'll start with Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services. We're being asked to approve contract for property, casualty, and liability insurance for 2020-2021. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair Alt, Directors of the Board, Superintendent Battle. I am referring to our annual contract that we engage in for our property, casualty, and liability insurance. So this is for the 2020 and 2021 school year. This is typically at this time of year in which we submit our applications in March, and we have our agents review exactly what it is that's available to us. Typically, there's some rate increases, but then there's also an assumed property increase as well, because if you go too many years without adjusting that, then it gets out of hand and you have jumps in your premiums. So we like to kind of keep that even Steven and kind of just move it up slowly, and we usually do 2% per year. So that is included in the projections that you see before you. Upon approval by the board, what happens then is we then bind the coverage. We'd like to do that prior to July 1st, so there's no gap in our coverage. As you can see in the recommendation, there are many different aspects to our property, casualty, and liability insurance with many different companies listed. And the dollar amounts that you see there are the proposed premiums for those particular companies and the insurance coverage that we have. There is a full binder on this information that is provided to us as proposed. Then once it is bound, we receive all of the legal documents that go with that policy. As we compare this year to the previous year, it is $32,652 higher than the previous year, and that equates to a 9.2% increase. Some of you may have heard that there is some rate increases that are occurring, particularly in the area of property. That was the biggest hit for us this year. That actually was more of a 16% increase, and so it's been leveled off by some of the others not increasing. So this is the proposal for the 2021 school year, and if I might read the recommendation. The recommendation is that the Board of Education approves the contracts for the property, casualty, and liability insurance for the 2020-2021 year with Affiliated FM Insurance Company, American Alternative Insurance Company, National Union Fire Insurance Company, Pittsburgh, PA, Auto Owners Insurance Company, Admiral Insurance Company, and Beasley Insurance Company.
Thank you, Lisa. I will take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Hume. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, will you please do the roll call?
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Holwiger,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. We will stay with Lisa. The next item, we're being asked to approve committed fund balance for FY20.
So this is a look back for the current year that we're wrapping up. And the purpose of this particular item on your agenda is that the school board, per the GASB statement number 54, has the opportunity to commit funds. That means that the board can determine what it is that they would choose to calculate and have committed during the audit process, but it is referencing the year we're closing up, and it must be done prior to the adoption of the, or prior to the end of the school year, excuse me. So we want to make sure that this is something that is before you. Typically in June is when we do this. And we are asking for carryover as part of the committed fund balance calculation. We would include carryover funds of particular departments and areas so that we can keep track of the dollars that are maybe brought in, say for sale of goods, and utilize those then for the projects that need to be taken care of in the areas that are relevant and related. Then there's the area that's new this year that is called out on your recommendation for student activity funds. There is action that has been taken that school districts were to, by July 1st of 2019, incorporate the student activity funds. The challenge for us was that the information coming from GASB wasn't necessarily finalized until about January, and then we had COVID hit. And so although they have delayed it, GASB has for another year for it to become a requirement, the state of Minnesota has already moved to remove the account codes and to put everything, all districts with student activities under board control. So they want and expect that we are going to abide by that regardless, and we will. But we also want to keep track of those balances separately so the student activity accounts know what their balances are at the end of any given fiscal year. So those would be calculated and kept track of under the committed funds. The ProPay funds, as has been the case in the past, will continue to also be calculated as part of the committed funds. So with that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approves the commitment of fund balance for fiscal year 2020 to include fund balance resulting from carryover funds, student activity funds, and ProPay funds.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
So
Moved by Director Schatz, seconded by Director Courier. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, please call the roll.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Holwiger,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Next, we are being asked to approve the FY21 adopted budget, staying with Lisa.
Thank you. So last week, during our board meeting, we gave a report on this, and you saw a PowerPoint presentation, which is included again this week for anyone in the public who would like to review it, as well as anyone who has any questions. However, tonight I'm going to refer to the narrative, the recommendation itself. There's about a 5-page document there, which kind of lays out some of the details and the highlights of this particular budget, and I'm just going to go through those very quickly. On the front of the recommendation is, and actually, if you don't mind, would you mind if I go ahead and share my screen? Okay, so let's do that. Are you now seeing the recommendation on the screen before you? Yes, okay. All right, so as a part of the recommendation, we do lay out for all of the funds that we have, that we keep track of in whole. We show the total revenue and total expenditure of the budget that we have proposed for the board. In addition, I am adding a column in the last few years that shows what is that essential increase or decrease for a given year, the year of FY21. So what is the difference between revenue and expenditures for each of those funds? And so you can see that in the far right column. So with the general fund, you can see that we're proposing a budget that has a spend down of fund balance of just under $1 million. And you can see what it looks like then for each of the different funds. In addition, then we go on in the recommendation to highlight some of the key points. So for instance, what is it that we are utilizing for the general education formula? Per legislation, there was a 2% increase coming into the FY21 school year. So we are utilizing that dollar amount that was determined by legislation. And so that is used in calculating the revenue that is necessary for the general fund education aid. In addition, we have our class sizes. What were the numbers that we utilized for elementary, for middle school, and for the high school? And so you can see those figures as well. They are a 1 increase per board board guidance. And so that has been included in this budget before you. Number 3, we're talking about the enrollment. It's really key to any budget that a school district is going to prepare, because that is where much of the revenue is calculated, is based off from that enrollment. You will see that we took a very conservative approach into going into FY21. This decision was made prior to pre-COVID, and it is something that we took guidance from the board on as well. So we have a decrease of 440 average daily memberships utilized, a total of 7,887 for the early childhood through grade 12 count. In addition, number 4, we always take a reduction in the general fund for our health insurance costs that are related to implicit rate under the other post-employment benefits. This is the premium portion that is related to our retirees. And we basically pay back the general fund from the revocable trust that we have. And we had sold bonds with our community support back in, 2009 is when the bonds were sold, and it did not require community support at that time. Number 5 is reflective of the increase in our 2020-2021 health insurance premiums. And I'm sorry, but that number should actually read 2.75%. I must have an old version up on my screen here. My apologies for that. You will see that that recommendation is actually a 2.75 increase. Number 6, the unassigned fund balance for the general fund is 6.86%, meaning that that is the amount, as you look at the total fund balance that's unassigned and divide it by the total expenditures in the general fund, you come up with that percentage. Our fund balance policy calls for an 8%, so this does require that approval of this proposed adopted budget will waive the defined minimum fund balance stated in board policy number 714. The adopted budget will be revised later in the 2021 school year to adjust for actual data relating to COVID-19 for the FY20 and FY21 impacts as we know them, any federal updates, enrollment changes, staffing, and audited fund balances. So that will happen in the fall. Prior to June 30th, the board needs to define the fund balances that would be in committing, and you have done that for the 1920 school year. Additionally, prior to November 30th, and this is new this year, the board will need to approve through board resolution any fund balance transfers to be used to cover the COVID-19 costs for the fiscal year 20. So as we're conducting our audit work and coming up with fund balances, we will also then ask for your approval of those fund balance transfers prior to finalizing the audit work. As we move into a little bit further conversation, there's in the next few pages discussion around each individual fund and the highlights around them. I won't spend the time going into detail on those, except to point out that as you get to page 3, and I think it's on here. Nope, it's page 4. My apologies. We do have under the food and nutrition, food service, there are the rates for the for the meals identified for the 2021 school year. And the proposed budget does not include any change in the rates for meals for next school year. So they remain the same as they were for the 1920 school year in our proposed budget. Under community education, you'll see that there's a very slight increase in the fund balance. It's very, very small, $857. We are basically trying to just break even in the community service fund. We do know that there are the assumptions that are made here. Let me jump down to that for a moment. Is the fact that the budget was developed in accordance with direction provided by the Board of Education, and it does not assume a distance learning approach for the 2020-2021 school year. Should that be a necessity, adjustments to the FY20 adopted budget will be necessary once we know what fall 2020 will require. There is potential for significant change as actual enrollment and staffing patterns are, they're recognized. I mean, the reality is that we have constant changes in our staffing assignments, and we adjust our staffing to best serve our students' needs. Therefore, the details that you see included in our documents will possibly and likely change in some areas. The proposed adopted budget, however, aligns with all of the projections that we've provided in this document, as well as what the board has provided guidance on with regard to what comfort level there was for a resulting proposed budget. I would point out under the format that, as has been the case, we continue to show our general fund budget broken down by budget units, and that's a separate attachment. Also a separate attachment is a list of employees for each budget unit. This year we have a third attachment that is around additional information that people can take a look at as well related to the general fund. And all of this will be culminated together with the PowerPoint that you saw, and that is also attached. That will all be included in a adopted budget book, which we will, once the board has approved this budget, we would then go to print with the final documents, and inclusive in that would be a narrative for each budget unit, which you do not currently see in our materials. That just takes a little bit longer time to basically go through and make sure everything's accurate. So that gives us a little bit of time if we are preparing that for you by August. Having gone through this recommendation, I would go back to the first page. And
that one.
And I will read the recommendation that the Board of Education approves the 2020-2021 adopted budget, providing all funds revenues of $175,070,662 and all funds expenditures of $175,489,038.
Thank you, Lisa. I will take a motion to approve.
Oh, so moved.
Moved by Director Chester, second.
Second.
Seconded, I think that was Director Hume. Questions or discussion? And if you would use your hand raise feature if there are questions or comments. Seeing none, I do have a statement that I've prepared. Tonight, this board will take action on a budget which reflects our responsibility to be fiscally responsible stewards of taxpayer money. Each June, we complete many months of discussion and debate, work which is focused on our responsibility to live within our means and provide the best possible education and growth experiences to our students. This year, however, is much like last year, unfortunately, in many ways. We have heard from our staff and our community, challenging this board and school district to attract and retain a diverse workforce, most specifically among our teaching staff. I personally extend these same expectations to all employees district-wide. This is our work, and this is our goal. Districts like 191 have successfully established practices to attract, hire, mentor, and support talented, caring employees who reflect the students we serve. State statute, PELRA, and tenure mandates create barriers in retaining staff. State and federal governments maintain unfunded mandates and provide inadequate funding for education. Beyond these two realities, which, by the way, can only be changed through legislation, 191 must resharpen our focus, become a destination district for families, and grow enrollment. In the absence of a positive shift in each of these three areas, 191 will continue to lose the best and brightest and the most diverse workforce to date. Our work as a school board is multifaceted and complex and requires heart and dedication. We do our best to support all of our students, embracing opportunity, advocacy, and action where we can, moving around and beyond barriers that we might encounter along the way where possible. Despite the setbacks reflected in the FY21 budget, we will continue to follow the tenets of our strategic plan. We will focus ourselves on becoming the district of choice again for our families to best serve the needs of our students and our community. In so doing, we will see the fruits of our efforts over time with a high quality, diverse teaching and workforce. Thank you. With that, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Jen Holwiger,
Aye.
Leslie
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt.
Aye. And the motion carries. Thank you very much. And thank you, Lisa, and your staff for everything that you've done. Next, we are being asked to approve proposed revisions and readopt the unchanged language in the Information Technology Specialists Master Agreement with Stacy Sovine, Executive Director of Human Resources. Welcome, Stacy.
Unfortunately, Stacy is unable to attend this evening as he's representing the district in another meeting. And
Got it.
so he's asked for me to cover for this and the next item.
Thank you.
So, yes, you're welcome. So the district reached a tentative agreement for a new 2-year contract with the Information Technology Specialist on May 19th of 2020. There are 10 members that are currently within that unit. During the collective bargaining process, 5 language items were on the table for discussion. IT ratified the agreement in late May. The major language items that were agreed upon in the tentative agreement include language on vacation time, language on fair share, which was a necessity given our change in law, and steps for both years, plus adjustments to the 403B. The economic terms agreed to include a 1% increase each year on career increment steps and a 2-year increased cost of $27,230. MSBA 2-year package increase, which is the formula used to make comparisons across the board, was a 2.45% increase. With that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the revisions and readopt the unchanged language in the 2019-2021 Master Agreement with the Information Technology Specialists.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Courier, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Questions? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Holwiger.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Staying with Lisa, we're being asked to approve the revisions and readopt the unchanged language in the Burnsville Association of Educational Assistants Master Agreement would be for 2019 through 2021.
Thank you. The district is also bringing forward a tentative agreement on a new 2-year contract with our education assistants, which was reached on May 20th. There are 214 assistants within the unit. During the collective bargaining process, 10 language items were on the table for discussion. The Burnsville Association of Educational Assistants, known as III.A, ratified the agreement earlier this month. Language items that were included were deleting some dated language, revision to the fair share language, as I mentioned earlier for the other agreement as well, modified language on long-term disability, a condensed salary schedule to improve the pay equity submission, and steps for both years. Economically, a 1% increase year one and two, a 1% increase, including longevity contribution. A 2-year increase cost for this particular group was $668,000. The MSBA 2-year package increase is a 6.20%. With that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the revisions and readopt the unchanged language in the 2019-2021 collective bargaining agreement with the Burnsville Association of Educational Assistants.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Questions? Ms. Kenny, please call the roll.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Jen Hallwiger,
Aye.
Leslie Chester.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Next, we are turning to policy. We're being asked to approve on a first reading basis new policy 599, memorials for deceased students or staff. And I'd like to welcome Brian Gersich, Assistant Superintendent, and Dana Thompson, Special Education Supervisor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Alt. Thank you, Superintendent Battle, Board of Directors, for this opportunity to present this evening. Just because there have been some connectivity things, Chair Alt, I'll just keep my eyes on you periodically if you just want to raise your hand if something happens, so I know to stop and check on that, just because, again, there is weather throughout there. I am joined this evening by Dana Thompson, and I want to just acknowledge on the front end appreciation for Dana as she led her team of school psychs in the development of this policy. So again, it is something that's brand new. It did not come from an MSBA model. So this is kind of a newer process for us, and there's a lot of work that went into this and quite a few questions, various versions of this. So thanks to Dana, and you'll hear more from Dana about how she led the team and part of the pieces of this policy that were discussed and why they ended up this way. I also want to offer my thanks to the policy committee as well. Again, as a new policy, it took various versions and a lot of feedback from the group to ensure that at least the language was consistent and something that could be supported. So thanks for the time and dedication by the policy committee in running through this. Throughout my career in educational leadership, I think one of, if not the most challenging things we deal with is loss of life, particularly when it impacts young people. Young people are not supposed to have tragic events and have their friends taken away from them at a young age. And death is difficult all the way through. But when we deal with loss of life within schools, it is difficult. And because of that, we need to be very deliberate about how we support our students and some of the practices that we go through. And I know that in my time here, I appreciate Dana and Stephanie White and the way they really do rush to support students and have things in place for the emotional needs of our students. But just from my own experiences in leadership as a principal and a superintendent, I also know from those experiences we need to be deliberate about the concept of memorials and how we are consistent about how death is acknowledged and the means of how and when those things are acknowledged as well, which is a part of what this policy stems from. We're not here to judge kids in how they've died or in other experiences. Again, in my past history, sometimes there was a debate of how and how frequently and what duration things are memorialized based on the popularity and impact of the student, or the methodology of death. If a student was tragically killed in a car accident versus died of disease at a young age, or died of recreational drug use, it creates this debate over what are we going to allow memorializing and what are we not. As a system, I believe it's not our position to judge. Life is tragically lost. Any life that's lost is tragic, regardless of means, and that's just kind of where some of that spirit comes from as well. I also want to acknowledge that as a school community, we had a number of occasions over the course of this school year where we did experience loss of life of young people that were connected to our schools. This inception was not because of that. We started talking about some of these concepts before this school year started, but certainly those outline some examples of how it really could have helped our administrators and leaders navigate this if we had some governing practices. So even as you discuss through the pieces of that, if there are changes recommended or otherwise, I would just advocate we have some governing practices on how we approach these things is really part of what could support our leadership in avoiding some, these are stressful times, particularly for the friends and family of the deceased. And when we have governing practices, it can help take some of the emotion out of our decision-making practices. What I'd like to do is just give you a very brief overview of a couple of the technical aspects of the policy that I'd like to point out. And then I'm going to again invite Dana to talk through some of the development of the policy and how, so you understand how that was developed. And initially what I will do, just again briefly refer you to General Statement of Policy, which is section 3 of the policy, part C to start with, which talks about temporary memorials. This would tell us what, when, where, and how long we would allow various memorials for deceased students. And that would say temporary memorials displayed for 1 week or until the funeral, displayed in a common area similar to a media center. And I'll allow Dana maybe to talk through the why of an area where students may be able to avoid should they choose to do so. But again, the piece that I want to outline is we're allowing temporary memorials in a specifically designated location for a very specific period of time. Part D then talks about permanent memorials. And essentially what we're talking about there is permanent memorials become exclusively things like endowments, scholarships, or educational items, not items like the memorial tree or a specific piece of property that gets placed out there for a permanent period of time. So essentially what we're saying with this policy is we would allow temporary memorials during that grieving process, but not things that would become a permanent fixture as a part of our property. And then the last thing I'll point out is just section H does talk about some other activities. Questions and things that came up for us over the course of this year did include things like graduation recognition or moments of silence. So you'll see that those are also outlined as a part of the policy. Now, again, I would like to invite Dana to come through and talk a little bit about the development of the process that went into this.
Thank you, Mr. Kursich. Good evening, Chair Alt, Superintendent Battle, and Board of Directors. And I want to thank Brian for his kind words to me, but I want to forward a lot of that on to the school psych team. They're a group that consistently impresses me, and in this case, they did not disappoint. They really came together and were a major part of developing this policy. So in 2019, fall 2019, Stephanie asked me to work with the school psych team to develop this policy. I created an initial draft based on the Prior Lake Savage Board policy. So I went through our neighboring districts and found all of their existing board policies that had to do with memorials. It wasn't universal. For example, Minneapolis, St. Paul, I could not find anything for them, but a lot of our local neighboring committees, such as Prior Lake Savage, Lakeville, Apple Valley, they did have policies. So I brought those to the school psych team. The first policy I wrote was basically the Prior Lake Savage one switched to Burnsville, just so we had a structure to work from. We then went through that policy, had several discussion points, talked about what we needed to learn more about, what we thought looked good, what we were confused by, and assigned different psychs and different groups to work on those specific things and to bring additional resources to the team. So we made this part of our department meetings, which meets once a month. It was a regular feature of this. We went through a few different processes, bring in different resources. We were ready to finalize the draft to give to Ryan right about when we had to switch everything we were doing this year. because of COVID-19. So it is a little delayed to get into because of that. It was supposed to be done earlier in the spring. So additional resources we pulled together include the NASP policy on memorials, the National Association of School Psychologists, and a really important one that we discovered somewhat late in the process was called After Suicide, a Toolkit for Schools. That became our primary resource in addressing the suicide aspect of this policy, which is likely going to be the most controversial aspect because there's a lot of debate about what to do after suicide, particularly when it comes to memorializing. That booklet was written by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and the Education Development Center, and it's endorsed by the National Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and the American School Counselor Association. We didn't take it as gospel, but we used what we saw in there. We looked at additional resources, and we did borrow quite a lot of wording from that document into the suicide section of our memorial policy. So under Brian's direction, we finalized a draft during COVID-19. It went through the policy committee. A few changes were made, excellent feedback provided, and we got to this point. We're presenting to you this hopefully finalized draft policy, but very open to feedback and changes as they come. Any questions for the board? Thank you, Gerald.
So we've already read the recommendation. Before we take questions, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schott, seconded by, I believe that was Director Chester. And I did want to make a note that Director Hallwiger has been having internet connectivity issues, and she has logged off for the evening. Next, getting back to the policy conversation, are there questions or comments for either Dana or Brian?
Not more of a comment, just to add on to the presentation that what was stated was emphasis on students, but it's also reflected that a lot of tragic incidents also happen regarding beloved staff. And so this policy really encompasses how we memorialize and recognize both deceased students and staff in this policy.
Thank you, Director Chester. Director Schatz?
Yep, and I will just add my thanks to Brian, Dana, and everyone who's involved with this. It's not easy. I've written many policy manuals in my life, and it is not easy to write something new like this. So kudos to you for managing that process and also managing the, it was kind of you to say there was some feedback from the policy committee, but we are not shy with our comments. And so there was lots of feedback from the policy committee. So thank you. The final draft is excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schatz. Director Courier.
Give me the discussion around the staff, not the contributions that can be given. That section, permanent memorials will be limited. What kind of discussions happened around that, or what was it like? And the reason I'm asking is when I was a teacher a long time ago, we planted a tree when the principal passed away. I mean, that was kind of a big deal at the time. So I noticed that would be something that wouldn't be allowed under this policy.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that briefly as part of that consistency piece, and then certainly Dana, if you had something to offer. Part of that for me, Director Courier, is the need for policy and consistency. Again, over the course of my career, I ran into those debates where a young person who died tragically serving our country overseas, and people wanted a memorial tree. And of course, there were a lot of people that came out to celebrate that. And then there was a request for a memorial tree for a young person who had died because of a recreational drug overdose. And there was a significant debate and even some pushback about what are we memorializing. And that's where I come back to those statements of any loss of life is tragic. And in those situations, that lack of consistency creates a debate about the value of life. And it was difficult as a school leader at that time to navigate those complexities. And that's where I think coming back to let's look at a policy and let's make some determinations on what that consistency can look like, is almost some of the reason for this, so that the beloved principal versus the one who maybe didn't have a career, that a lot of people were excited to get that memorial tree or other kinds of things out there. And what is that speaking to? And is that something we want to support? Maybe I'm being a little extreme on that one, but I think you understand some of what I'm talking about.
No, I get it, but thank you. Thank you.
And if I could just add just one thing as part of that policy, existing memorials established prior to the Appalachians policy won't be affected. So some of the things that do exist, some of those beloved trees, benches, they can remain. This does not go backwards in time and we have to remove those things. But moving forward, as Brian said, consistency is important. Understanding that every life is precious is important. And we can't really ethically, morally, and practically offer what we'd want to every student if we're doing things like permanent memorials consistently.
Mhm.
The one other thing, if I could just note, because it's somewhat related, this came up during the discussion by the policy committee, was how does this potentially conflict with policy 899, which is about the naming of sites. And that is a different policy and a different procedure. If there was, for example, a new building that was built and it was going to be named after someone, it talks in that policy about that person having made a significant contribution in their field, in the community. So under that, it would be governed by that policy comparatively to a memorial. If that happens to be a part of that naming process, that is governed by the school board.
Thank you. Director Schatz, I just want to check to make sure that your hand isn't actually up. Or do you
I'm
have a
having trouble
question?
getting it down.
Gotcha, no problem. Any other questions? I guess I just had a couple of comments, again, echoing the thanks to everyone and for being proactive and really thinking about honoring and celebrating the lives of our students and beloved staff. And that really, in this case, I believe that quality does represent equity in terms of consistency and celebrate and life celebrations. So thank you very much for that. With that, Ms. Kenny, would you please call the roll?
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, we're being asked to approve the contract for Nicollet Middle School Special Education Bathroom Project, returning to Lisa Ryder.
Thank you. Is it the Nicollet or is it the William Byrne?
I had, William Byrne, you're right. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so thank you. On Friday, April 17th, 2020, a restroom addition proposal was received from Rack Construction Incorporated. We have a need, as we have closed 3 schools for next year, to relocate some of our focus programs to the existing schools, and we need to make sure that there are restrooms that are close enough and available for the students in those programs. Therefore, there were originally 4 different locations that we were looking into. 2 of them have been brought before you tonight. The other 2 we have held off on due to the high cost of the projects. But these 2 we feel we need to move forward with. This one is for William Byrne Special Education Restroom Project, and as I said, we received a proposal. We're utilizing our relationship with Sourcewell Cooperative contract, where they have already gone through the process of a bidding process to determine rates of various different contractors. Then what we can do is we can utilize that access to these various contractors, show them our locations, explain the project to them in advance of them providing a quote, and that allows us to stay very, very close to the amount that they give us, and we have not seen change orders on the other projects that they have done for us. So we really like that idea. So as you take a look at this one, the proposal we received is in the amount of $187,818.75 for a 2021 restroom addition project at William Byrne. It is a special education project, so Stephanie has gone through the process with Minnesota Department of Education to seek approval for the use of our federal funds for this project, and that has been approved. So the funding will come from federal special ed funds. And with that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the William Byrne Special Education 2021 Restroom Addition Project in the amount of $187,818.75 to RAC Construction Incorporated.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Schatz, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Miller. Questions or comments?
I just have one quick question.
Go ahead.
So it says 2021 restroom. So will that be done like next summer, a year from now?
No, so when it says 2021, it's
Or
for
maybe
the,
from the fiscal year 21?
yes. So we're going to begin this project as soon as it's approved. In fact, they're ready to roll next week if it's approved. And then with that, we're hoping to still have everything done by September.
Great. And is it the same for the next one? Because then I will not have the
It
same
is.
question.
It is. Same for the next one as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I appreciate knowing, Lisa, that we haven't had any change orders. It's always good to hear that.
Yes.
We can't, Glenn retired, there can't be any change orders now going forward.
That's true. That's true. Ms. Ketty, would you please call the roll?
Chad Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail L,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Shaw,
Aye.
Edie Courier.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Turning to approving a contract for Nicollet Middle School Special Education Bathroom Projects.
Thank you. You've heard the background related to William Byrne. It all applies to the Nicollet Middle School project as well. Same date, the restroom addition proposal was also received from RAC Construction Incorporated. In this particular location's amount was $184,546.82 for the restroom addition project at Nicollet Middle School. Again, through the Sourcewell contract and special education project that has been approved for federal funding. With that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the Nicollet Middle School Special Education 2021 Restroom Addition project in the amount of $184,546.82 to RAC Construction Incorporated.
Thank you. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Director Courier, second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Hume. Questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, please call the roll.
Eric Miller,
Aye.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Edie Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Final item on our new business section of the meeting. We're being asked to approve a contract with Normandale Community College for post-secondary enrollment options, also known as PSEO services for 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you. So you may recall that it was about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or that we had arranged for what we call an income contract. And this came from a few other districts around us that had started utilizing them, particularly through Normandale Community College. And it has spread also to Inver Hills, where we utilize it there as well. Tonight before you is the Normandale Community College agreement for post-secondary enrollment options. And utilizing the income contract allows for us to be billed directly from the community college and we pay the rate of $225 per credit hour. The other method of doing this would be to do the more traditional method that actually involves Minnesota Department of Education in the process, and then everything rolls through our Gen Ed revenue. And yet there's some portion of that process that ends up instead being kind of removed from income that the college would receive and also income that we otherwise might have access to. So we chose to go the income method some years ago. It has proven to be far better than if we had done the traditional. So we want to continue this process. This is a 1-year agreement. The last time I believe it was a 3-year agreement. And the reason for that is they are a little bit concerned that the 225 rate may not necessarily hold true for them in the future, and they're in the process of analyzing that. So therefore, they're asking for only a 1-year agreement. The Inver Hills is not before you this evening, but will be coming to you in August, as their timing is just slightly different than the Normandale Community College. So with that, the recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the income contract with the state of Minnesota acting through its Board of Trustees of the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities on behalf of Normandale Community College for PSEO for the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Director
Second.
Cruz, seconded by, looks like Director Miller. Questions or comments? Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, please call the roll.
Abigail Alt,
Aye.
Leslie Chester,
Aye.
Darcy Schatz,
Aye.
Dee Dee Courier,
Aye.
Scott Hume,
Aye.
Eric Miller.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Thank you. I will now declare us adjourned. We are going to a workshop next. We have several different items. First, we will be receiving information on Open Facilities Planning 2020 and next steps. Then we will be discussing FY21 Superintendent Goals. And finally, the board will be reviewing our board project or planning calendar to get board members' input